have bad news for you. You are going to fail. Now, this is nothing new for you because if you've been in ministry for one day, you have already probably in some way failed. We know throughout history, throughout scripture, throughout personal experience, nobody truly succeeds without having to fail first in one way or another. That's part of the process. And yet, especially in the church, we have this understanding of failure that is so narrow that we don't know how to redeem failure. In Pillars, failure is an important part of growing and knowing how God develops us because it's going to be there. We have to lead others through it, including ourselves. Paul actually wrote about failure indirectly and yet with an insight for us in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Here's what he said. All of us are looking with unveiled faces at the glory of the Lord, as if we were looking in a mirror. We are being transformed into that same image from one degree of glory to the next degree of glory. Paul paints a picture that says we are all growing from one degree of glory to the next degree of glory. And as you grow through that process, sometimes you stumble, sometimes you fail. Imagine a child, an infant, who begins to learn to crawl. And as they are crawling, the next step is they begin to learn to walk. When a baby is learning to walk and takes its first few steps, it will fall. It's inevitable. No child stands up and then walks forever without ever falling. They fall. It's part of the learning process. However, no parent gets angry at a child for falling when it is learning to walk. Paul, in describing our process in the book of Corinthians, is saying we are learning to walk and then we will learn to run, to go from glory to glory. And yet, isn't it true oftentimes that when somebody in the church doing ministry fails, we are angry at them? We don't see this as a process of growth that goes on. Now, I'm not talking in this session about moral failure. I'm talking about when you are trying new things and doing ministry and not everything works perfectly as you hoped it would be. Because there is a failure that comes with ministry or anything in life, people can become afraid of failure and it can paralyze them. There is the temptation to avoid risks, to play it safe, to be really careful with decision making so you can almost guarantee pure success in what you're going to be doing. There's the temptation when there is failure to kind of cover it up, to speak better about it than it was. But there is a cycle that you can find yourself into if you're not careful. If fear is dictating your action in ministry, you will not have action, you will have inaction. And inaction leads to inexperience. You don't learn anything because you haven't actually stepped out to do something new in a sense. And inexperience leads to inability. You don't have the ability to grow into new ways of doing ministry because you've never stepped out to do something. And I think this is where it becomes really important. We have to know how to remove the stumbling block of fear, both for ourselves and for those we are lead. We have to know, how do we redeem failure? You really have two choices as a leader. You can approach it in a way that will end in breakdown. People will be overwhelmed. People will feel guilty. People will quit ministry because they tried something and it didn't work and there's failure. And some of you may have personally experienced this. You had failures and you didn't know how to navigate that failure and it really paralyzed you for the future. Or you can have a breakthrough. Instead of a breakdown, there is a breakthrough. And that you have failures, the exact same failures, but you know and are equipped how to navigate that failure, how to redeem that failure. The beginning of this is to have a real biblical, clear understanding of failure and how failure works and how God uses it in our ministry and in our lives. So I want you to think with me for a second. We understand and know that failure is necessary to move into success. Nobody will succeed without some stumbling along the way, because that's how you learn, that's how you grow, that's how you discover. If you're a leader and you're looking at your team and you have aspirations for how they will succeed, you have to start with the premise, how will they fail? How might they stumble that will help them to succeed? No great athlete who wins at the Olympics ever succeeded every step. They had some failures that allowed them to grow and to exceed. All the great leaders of the Bible who ended up doing amazing things for the kingdom had some failures. And as a leader, rather than passively waiting for a failure in our people and having to react to it, I think we should position ourselves to design. Don't misinterpret this, but almost set them up for failure. They need an experience that will stretch them, an experience that will go past their ability, and they may stumble, but they will learn from that. When Jesus called Peter out of the boat to walk on water, I think Jesus knew Peter may start good and then stumble and find himself sinking. But he still called him to do that. Because when Peter began to sink, Jesus' hand was right there with him all along, taking what might seem to be a failure and turning it into greater trust for Peter's future. You see, failure, it will either be a stumbling block to you or to your people, or it will be a stepping stone for how they will move forward. And the difference between the two will be the mindset that you put in them, the teaching that you give them before the experience. They need a knowledge and an understanding of how you see failure so that they can embrace that and they know that to be the case. When I was pastoring, I had a young man come up on a Sunday morning to take the offering moment in our church. And before he stood up, and I knew he was very nervous, and I had a sense it may not go perfectly well. And I looked to him and I said, "This is not the first time you will be doing this." Immediately, this man knew there will be more opportunities. And even if this opportunity is a bit rocky, Joel has said there will be more opportunities. It's either going to be a stumbling block or a stepping stone. It's on you as a leader to set them up in that way. Failure can create this great maturity, or it can reinforce an insecurity. That's our role as leaders, is to know that when there are challenging moments, how do we cause this to develop maturity? If we respond the wrong way, then it can generate an insecurity that will stop them from really growing in all that God has for them. Now, for that to take place, to lead people to that kind of an awareness and that kind of a development, at the beginning, we need to be really clear with our goals, with our strategies, with what we want them to do. If we're really clear with that, then as they grow in that and they struggle, there's a contrast. Imagine a department in a church, a women's department, and 3 ladies are asked to take over that department. And the pastor says, as you work together, I expect you to collaborate and work in unity. By setting that as one of the standards, when these 3 ladies begin to not collaborate, when they begin to argue, the pastor can pull out that standard that was established and said, you've failed. Let's learn from that. Let's go from that. If that standard's not established, then what is or is not a failure isn't as clear. So as a leader, you have this great responsibility and great opportunity to take a position that says failure is actually a gift from God. Everybody can fail forward, but I've got to lead this first by their understanding and then by my leadership practice with them, because oftentimes as leaders, we are unprepared for when our people fail. Let me give you a couple of suggestions as to how you can guide your team members and even yourself when there is a struggle, when there is a failure. First of all, make sure you separate a person's identity from their failure. Failure is an action. Their identity is permanent. Their character is distinct. When somebody fails, the first thing they're going to do is label it to their identity. I am a failure. And they need a leader's voice speaking into them that says, this activity may not have succeeded, but you are still who you are, created in God's workmanship to do good works. So you have to separate the failure from the identity. Sometimes in heated moments when there's a failure, you got to watch your words carefully, because you may actually be reinforcing the temptation of the devil on them to say, this is me not just my action. So separate that. And you must know that when somebody fails, rejection, the sense of rejection, always accompanies failure. The reason why rejection always accompanies failure is because there is an enemy. And the enemy will whisper in somebody's heart and mind, see, they don't accept you anymore. See, they don't want you anymore. You have to understand that when somebody fails, this can happen in a ministry context, it can happen in a family context. You have to understand that they will have a sense of rejection and you have to address it directly. You have to compensate for it. You have to speak into that knowing it's there, because they will never tell you that they are feeling rejected. They would never dare say that because they failed, but they are feeling that. And if you're aware of that, you can speak into it and you can affirm them and you can continue them. That's why when Peter looked up at Jesus and said, "Get away from me, Lord, I'm a sinner," he had failed and he was feeling that rejection. And Jesus lifts him up and says, "Peter, I choose you." This is what leaders do when people fail. We use it as a stepping stone for their growth and maturity. Yeah, you have to manage people's expectations also, though. Some people will be very enthusiastic and they may try something and they think it's going to bring revival to the entire city, and their expectations are not that great. And then when it doesn't happen as they expected, they feel like a failure. And they have to understand, you have to have managed expectations. When I wrote my first book, I thought millions of copies would be sold. And a good friend of mine said, "Joel, maybe not millions." And it really helped me, because if that had been my expectation, I would have thought that 50,000 copies sold was a fail. But it wasn't. It was moving from glory to glory to glory. So we as leaders, we manage people's expectations so they can see the goodness and the success even while there may be some failure within that process. Here's another suggestion that I think is very important. When people fail as leaders, we are tempted to define all of our training of the people around their failure. We look at what they did wrong, we look at what they're not good at, and then all of our development of them and all of our training is defined by the failure. Listen to me carefully. Do not define the training of people by their failure. We develop and build people on their strengths. We train people based upon their strengths, not their failures. You have to be aware of the failure. You have to address the failure. But if you try to change them based upon the failure, you may actually rob them of their strengths. We are all gifted differently. We're all kind of wired differently. And yet somehow we have this wrong idea that every one of us needs to be the perfectly rounded Christian minister who can do everything. And God didn't set it up that way. I have a gift. I have a personality that God gave me. The very nature of my strength, my gift and personality, means there's probably a corresponding weakness where I may fail in. I'm a strong-minded person. I'm a teacher. I look at things in a unique way. I ask hard questions. That means I'm not always the person who is most compassionate or merciful. And I may fail in that way. And if my authority tries to train me to be fully compassionate and fully merciful, then they may actually rob me of how God has wired me. So while we need to address the failure, we need to be very careful that we do not let the failure define our training and leadership development of the person. We need to continue to focus on their strengths and give them an understanding. When you are leading people and you want to redeem failure, and there is an instance when one of your team members has failed or you have failed, here are 3 questions you should always ask. First, why did it fail? Explore it. Understand it. Diagnose the causes of it. How was it a failure? The better you can understand it, the better you can diagnose it, the better you can understand what needs to change in some ways. So really ask that question. Why did it fail? And do an investigation into it. You may discover, well, it didn't really fail. It may have looked like it on the outside, but the more we looked into it, there was actually some really good successes here. Why did it fail? Second question, what issues were exposed? This becomes very important. As you're trying to develop people, you want to make sure that you can target how you can address the failure. And all of a sudden, we just look at failures blanketly. But look at it more precisely. Was it a skill issue that was exposed? They simply weren't trained well enough. Was it an attitude issue, a character issue that was exposed? Maybe it was a strategy issue. They actually did their job really well, but the program shouldn't have been on a Tuesday night. It should have been on a Friday night. And that might have been exposed. Maybe the exposure was there wasn't enough learning done beforehand. So you ask the first question, okay, why did it fail? You ask the second question, what issues did this failure expose? And then you ask a very interesting third question, who is needed? Usually when we examine failure, we understand the what question and the why question and the how question, but we rarely ask the who question. When there is a failure, usually it's always there was an absence of a person. Somebody was too much on their own, they didn't have a team member. Somebody didn't have a leader guiding them. Usually it is the absence of a person. So when there is a failure, always ask the who question. Who was needed? Who could have played a role in here? How would that have worked? Nobody has the full complements of gifts and skills. We need each other. And so when there's a failure, ask the who question. God is moving us glory to glory to glory, and He is putting us in a position as leaders where we help others move from glory to glory to glory. But when people step out and in faith take on responsibility and ministry, they're going to stumble. Like a baby learning to walk, they're going to fall. As a leader, you got to be aware of this. This is actually a God moment. God is teaching them how to grow. It's a stepping stone. And you need to be present to lead them through that stepping stone. Using these skills, you will see your people grow and mature and flourish. Oftentimes, when I see team members who continue to fail at the same way they have been failing, it means there's been an absence of a leader. I give a direction to somebody, I expect them to do it, they don't do it, or they fail, and then I get angry at them and tell them to do it again. That's not leadership. But when I understand what it means to come alongside of them, to prepare them, to coach them, to have an expectation around that, and then to guide them in their development when they do stumble, and leadership, true leadership takes place, then they're going to fail again, but their failure is going to be something new. It's okay to fail. Just make sure you're failing at something new and learning new lessons from it, rather than failing at the same thing over and over again. Be a leader who understands failure is part of the process, but let's redeem failure and not let it be an obstacle to our people's growth.